Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Amud Yomi, Masechet Succah. We are on Daf Gimal, Amud Aleph, smack in the middle of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Schut Rufuah Shelema for Rachel Simcha Bad Nahid, that should have full recovery, Rufuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Also for the girl in our community that needs Rufuah Shelema, Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, that should have Rachabe Shamayim Be'ezrat Hashem, a full recovery, Rufuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This month's learnings of the community have been graciously dedicated by the Shea family, Dayan family, Kohen family. Should be an ultimate zchut for all the mishpachot Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This week's learnings have been also dedicated by the Rosen family for safety of our chayalim, our soldiers, and the speedy return of all of the chatufim, all the hostages, Be'ezrat Hashem, to the arms of their families. The Amud Yomi this week also is dedicated by Dr. Yoram Nasir in memory of Avraham ben Yehuda. So the Neshama should have an aliyah, Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. And for Rufuah Shelema of Sharon ben Rivka. Now, we started yesterday with a discussion in a famous machloket Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. So we started saying that the Gemara tells us all over the place, specifically in Masechet Yevamot on page 13, the Gemara says halacha is always like Bet Hillel. In fact, there was a bat kol that announced that Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, we always follow Bet Hillel to the degree that Bet Shammai b'makom Bet Hillel ena Mishnah. That we completely disregard Bet Shammai when they are in disagreement with Bet Hillel. And yet, the Gemara told us that seemingly we paskin like Bet Shammai over here in our sugya of what is the minimum size of a sukkah. If you want to make a small, again, I always thought, who is going to do that? But I saw this year, one of the Chabadskers in this neighborhood, amazing person, he actually had crafted a minimum size of sukkah, and it was sukkah on wheels attached to the back of his bike, and he was literally biking around in the community with this small sukkah to have people maybe have the mitzvah of sukkah, promoting it and so on. Very pretty beautiful scene sight to see. But nevertheless, the Gemara says that Shammai is the one that seems to say the minimum size of sukkah is 7 by 7 tfachim, versus Bet Hillel, who seems to hold that you don't need your shulchan, you don't need your eating arrangement in the sukkah. 6 by 6 tfachim is sufficient. As long as you can fit your majority of your body inside, that is fine. Now, the Gemara challenged this, that maybe you completely misunderstood the machloket of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, because we're going to have an upcoming machloket of Tanaim. What is this minimum size of sukkah? And Rabbi Yehuda, for instance, says the minimum size of sukkah is 4 amot by 4 amot. It has to be at least 6 feet by 6 feet for it to be kasher. So maybe this Mishnah that you're quoting from Daf Kafchet from page 28 is not speaking necessarily about a small sukkah. Maybe it's speaking about a different setting of a person's meal in the sukkah. So let's actually take a moment to take a look at this Mishnah, because the next few lines we're going to be going back and forth trying to understand this Mishnah. So turn your pages to 28a, Kafchet Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says, towards the bottom of the Amud, Mi shehaya rosho verubo besukkah. A person who is sitting in a position that his head and the majority of his body is in the sukkah, v'shulchano betoch habayit, and his shulchan, his table, his sandwich, his food, his plate is inside the house, is not in the sukkah. Bet Shammai poslin, ubet Hillel machshirin. Bet Shammai say this is pasul, it's not kasher. Bet Hillel say no, it's fine, no problem. So says the Gemara, who says that this is talking about the minimum size of sukkah? Maybe you're sitting, again, we have a lot of this happening in balconies nowadays. In Eretz Yisrael, it's all over the place. Even by us, you have an awning of the house, you're using the wall of the house to the backyard. That's one of your 3 walls. And you have awning, so you're doing dofer akuma, but you're using that area as your entirety of sukkah. You can't sit under the awning. That is a solid ceiling, but you could use it for women, you could, for people who little kids, not chaya b'sukkah. So if you're sitting and table is there, you're under the schach, but your table is under the awning. So can you eat or not? So Bet Shammai say you can't. Bet Hillel say you can't. Maybe that's the machlok. You talk about a ginormous sukkah. It's just that the setting you have is you're sitting under the schach. Your table is under the ceiling. It's pasul. It's inside the house, technically speaking. And that's the machloket. And the Gemara says, I even prove it to you. Because, what's the language of the Mishnah? Let's read it carefully one more time together. If you have a setting of someone that's sitting in the sukkah, but his shulchan is in the house. He doesn't say a sukkah that is so small that only fits your body and not your shulchan. If you're talking about a small sukkah, that's the language you should be using. Not that if you happen to be sitting in the sukkah and your shulchan is in the house. So says the Gemara, maybe that's the machloket. And nobody has spoken within Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai about a minimum size of sukkah. That's not even the discussion. That's where we left off yesterday, right? Now, as we'll see, the Gemara is going to push back on this and win to a great degree. Says the Gemara, Ve'im ita machzeket ve'ena machzeket mi ba'ile. About 20 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, the line starts with mi ba'ile. The Gemara, surprised, asks a question, Ubesukkah ktana lo pligi? You want to suggest that there's no machloket, there's no argument in Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai about the minimum size of sukkah, if it's 6 by 6 tfachim versus 7 by 7 tfachim? V'hatanya, we have a different parallel braita to this Mishnah. Machzeket rosho verubo v'shulchano kshera. The braita says, if you have a sukkah that fits the majority of your body, your head, the majority of your body, and your shulchan, which is 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim, is kasher. Rabbi Omer, at sheheba arba'a amot al arba'a amot. Rabbi says, no, you need, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, you need 4 amot by 4 amot, 6 feet by 6 feet, minimum. And then there is another braita. So in other words, one braita says machloket Rebbe and Tarakama as being 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim versus 6 feet by 6 feet. That's the machloket. But there is another braita that says it a little different. Tanya Idach Omer, Rebbe Omer, Kol Skashem ba arba amot al arba amot psula. Rebbe says if you don't have 6 feet by 6 feet is pasul. V'chachamim omrim, chachamim of that braita is afilu ena machzeket el rosho v'rubo keshera. Even if you only have your head and the majority of your body that fits in, it's kasher. So in other words, we have 2 braitas. One of them says Rebbe versus 7 by 7. The other one says Rebbe versus 6 by 6. So you do have, in the Tanaic world, you have 3 shitas. There is 6 feet by 6 feet. There is 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim. And then there's 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim. right? Both of them exist. So says the Gemara, there's no shulchano in the second braita. It's 6 by 6 tfachim, not 7 by 7. Kashan ahadadi. You see that these two braitas are presenting this minimalistic shita of 6 or 7 tfachim differently. Ella lav shemamina habet shamai habet hillel. So it must be that there's machloket tanaim, and I was correct in my understanding of the Mishnah in Daf Kaf Chet Amud Aleph, because we don't have any other place for it. So it must be that this Mishnah in Daf Kaf Chet is actually speaking about a sukkah ketana. It's actually speaking about a small sukkah. Now the Gemara says, you think I'm just shooting in the dark from the hip? No. I will prove it to you from the very language of the Mishnah on page 28 on Daf Kaf Chet. Says the Gemara, Amar Morzutra, Matnitin Namidaika. Pay attention to the language of the Mishnah on Daf Kaf Chet. Midekatani, that's before we read it, let's actually turn the page back to 28 and read with me. Mishaya Rosho Verubo Besukkah. If you're sitting Rosho Verubo, not Shulchano, in the Sukkah, and your Shulchan is in the house, Bet Shammai, help me out, what's the language? Bet Shammai Poslin. That means, Bet Shammai say the Sukkah is pasul. If they want to tell you the Sukkah is kasher, you just were not Yotze, they have to say exactly that, Lo Yotze. You were not Yotze. You did something wrong. The sukkah is not wrong. The sukkah is okay. You did something wrong. Take your shulchan in. The sukkah is big, right? Bet Shammai poslin means Bet Shammai said this scenario is pasul. The sukkah is worthless. So says Mor Zutra. You think the Mishnah just uses the language like that? Mishnah is very precise throughout the Masechta. Yesterday we spoke about how precise the Masechta is. And it says poslin is always when you're disqualifying the sukkah. Machshirin is when you are qualifying the sukkah to be kasher. So therefore, says Mor Zutra, you see it embedded in the language of the Mishnah that we're talking about a minimalistic sukkah of 6 or 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim. Says the Gemara, Daikanami midekatani Bet Shammai poslin u Bet Hillel machshirin. It's a matter of psul versus kasher, not yatsa velo yatsa ve'im ita Bet Shammai lo yatsa u Bet Hillel omrim yatsa mi ba'ile. That's what we should have said if we're talking about the large sukkah. Now, of course, what's the existential question? We turned the page twice to 28a, right? And we proved once from the language embedded in the Mishnah that we're talking about the big sukkah. Because it says, versus saying, a sukkah that doesn't fit your shulchan just fits your body, right? That was also a proof. It was a very solid proof. And then we made a diuk in the language at the end of that same sentence, Bet Shammai poslim u Bet Hillel machshirin, which indicates that we're talking about the big sukkah. So which one is it? Is it the big sukkah? Or is it the small sukkah? Both of those diukim are embedded in the language of Mishnah, and that's exactly what the Gemara asks now. Says the Gemara, Ella, how do you deal with this discrepancy in the diukim? Vela kasha mishaya. The diuk in the beginning is going to now be a problem. Says the Gemara, no problem. The olam betarti pligi. Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai have two parallel machlokets in the size of sukkah and in the scenario in which you position yourself in the sukkah. Besukkah ktana, they argue in sukkah ktana. Bet Shammai are the ones who hold the minimum amount of space you need for the sukkah to be kasher is you and your shulchan, which is 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim. That's the anything less than that, pasul. Bet Hillel said no. As long as you can fit yourself, you're good to go. So 6 tfachim by 6. That's one machloket. Upligi besukkah, and also they argue with sukkah gedola. Even if you have a ginormous sukkah, if you're sitting in such position that you are sitting under the schach, your table is under the awning inside the house, that's a different machloket. Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, vechasuri mechsera vehachi katani. And the Mishnah should really be a longer language. The Mishnah has compressed the language in the shortest way possible, but the way it really should be saying is the following. 10 lines up from the bottom, right? Mishaya rosho verubo besukkah veshulchano betoch habayit. Hey, one halacha number one. If you're sitting in the sukkah and your shulchan, your sandwich, your plate, your table is inside the house, which means we're talking about a big sukkah, but your position is your table is inside the house. Bet Shammai omrim lo yatsa. Bet Shammai says you're not yotze. The sukkah is kosher, but you're not yotze doing that. Bet Hillel omrim yatsa. Bet Hillel says no, it's fine. We're not. Bet Shammai hold that when your table is in the house, you're always drawn after the food. So if you're choshesh, right, that you are going to stand up and your body is tilted and now you're eating in the house outside the sukkah, it's a problem. Especially in parentheses, in important parentheses. We should have said this really 2 weeks ago before Sukkot finished. But especially in light of a halacha, that when you're in the middle of Suda, right, and this happens all the time, by the way, especially by those houses that they have the sukkah adjacent to the house, when you're in the middle of the meal, you cannot even drink a sip of water outside the meal. Normally speaking, you could have water, rice, whatever it is, meat, outside the sukkah. There's no problem. Achilat arai. But even achilat arai, it's asur outside the sukkah while you're in the middle of suda. So once you washed and said hamotzi and you're in the middle of suda, right? And then you want to have some tadik, but you don't want people to see it. You want to go to the kitchen and munch and that Persian delicacy. That you cannot do that, right? Everything is revealed to all the guests. You have to do it inside the sukkah. So obviously that becomes a problem, says the Gemara. That's one. Secondly, are we continuing in the language of how the Mishnah should be written? So I missed my place here. Oh, here. So that's first halacha, that you're yotze v'yotze v'she'ena machseket el hakderosho v'rubo bilvad bet Shammai poslin u'bet Hillel machshirin. And if your sukkah only fits, small sukkah, only fits your head and the majority of your body, which is 6 by 6 tfachim, small, tiny sukkah, then bet Shammai say that's pasul. You don't have the minimum requirement of a sukkah, and bet Hillel say no, that's kasher. So there are two parallel machlokits going on in that Mishnah, and the language has to be a little bit more, it's cryptic, it has to be a little bit longer and a little bit more explicit than what we have in our Masechta. Fine. So it says, by the way, this is the end of this. This is the maskara of the Gemara, which begs a massive question. We just started today's shiur conveniently throwing out the Gemara in Yevamot 13, right? That Bet Shammai, in comparison with Bet Hillel, is completely X'd out. Ain't a Mishnah. And now that we just spend a few minutes inside Gemara, it turns out to be that we were wrong, right? Turns out that the maskara of the Gemara is actually Bet Shammai holds that your sukkah has to be minimum 7 by 7. Bet Hillel is the one that holds 6 by 6 tvachim, small tiny sukkah is also fine. And everybody around this massive table knows that what's the minimum shiur of sukkah? 7 by 7. Everyone knows that. So we do passing like Bet Shammai. And Gemara said it earlier on also. He said, it is Bet Shammai, and from it don't you deviate. Right? So what happened? So take a look at the massive Tosfot on the side over here. The right on the side. The Tosafot here says they are, yes, correct, that Gemara Yevamot is amazing. It's mentioned so many times throughout Shas, but like many other things in life, that are exceptions to the rule. And this is one of the unique exceptions to the rule of Bet Shammai versus Bet Hillel. In this place, we do paskin like Bet Shammai. This and another 5 places throughout the entire Shas, hundreds and hundreds of machlokets, Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. In all of them, halacha is like Bet Hillel, outside 6 examples, not examples, 6 exceptions. And this is one of the 6. If you have the patience to go through the whole thing, all 6 are mentioned in the Tosafot over here, but just reading together the first 3 lines, Beseder, Rav Amram Gaon is the one that goes through Shas and actually comes out with all the exceptions. Pasak b'shisha mekomot halacha kebet Shammai. Rav Amram Gaon paskins in 6 scenarios, in 6 machlokets, like Bet Shammai versus Bet Hillel. Chada hayde sukkah sricha shetehem machzeket rosho v'rubo b'shulchano. And this Gemara of Masechet Sukkah Daf Gimel Amud Aleph fame is one of those 6, and then he goes through the other 5, which will be homework for you to read and stump the other people, say, where in Shas do we paskin like Bet Shammai versus Bet Hillel? So have fun with those examples there, but this becomes one of the examples. And by the way, this is the second time really we have discussed this. We mentioned the preface to the Masechta that our Gisa in Daf Yud Aleph is Machloket Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, whether or not the sukkah that we make is Zecher La'ananei Kavod, or is it because Sukkot Mamash Asu, that they actually built sukkah huts in the Midbar. And we mentioned that seemingly we should be paskening like Rabbi Akiva, because that's the rule. Whenever you have Rabbi Eliezer and somebody else, the halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer. Whenever you have Rabbi Akiva and somebody else, halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. Certainly when you have Rabbi Eliezer versus Rabbi Akiva, halacha should be like Rabbi Akiva, and yet we still paskin based on our girsa. Now I mentioned for all intellectual honesty that there are girsaot that you could even find referenced on the side of the newer Gemaras that they reverse or they change the names of that machloket, but the way we have the girsa turns out to be one of the anomalies in Shas that we would paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus versus Rabbi Akiva in that way as well, to say that sukkah is actually zecher la'ananei kavod the way we have it. So the Gemara says,
do we paskin like Beit Shammai also in the case where it's a big sukkah but your body is, the shulchan is outside? Do we follow that Beit Shammai also?
We'll discuss that when we get to Daf Kafchet. That's a very good question, and we'll see that perhaps the Mishnah goes on with that. Now, once he asked it, the Mishnah actually has a very interesting language that the Mishnah brings in a story attached to this Machloket Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, as far as the larger sukkah is concerned. Says the Mishnah, Amru lahem Bet Hillel Bet Shammai. Following that machloket, Bet Hillel tells Bet Shammai, Lo kach haya maaseh. Don't you know that there was a story? Shehalchu ziknei Bet Shammai v'ziknei Bet Hillel bakeret Rabbi Yochanan ben HaChoranit. They went to actually visit the elders of the school of Bet Hillel, and the elders of the school of Bet Shammai went to visit this Rabbi Yochanan ben HaChoranit. And they found him that he was sitting in a larger sukkah. It's mashma. He was actually sitting and eating like this. His shulchan was inside the house. He himself was inside the sukkah. Velo amru lo davar, and they didn't say anything to him, which means, are you good to go? Now, this is one of the places that this story itself is shanui b'machloket. Says the Mishnah, Amr Rahem, but Shammai told Bet Hillel, says, no, you're missing it. You're missing the fact. You know what they told? They actually did say something. Amru Rahem Bet Shammai, maybe after the Bet Hillel people left, then they brought this up to be respectful to the Bet Hillel. They didn't say anything, but afterwards, certainly they said, Misham Raya, Avhem Amru Lo, they did tell Rabbi Yochanan ben HaChoranit, Im Ken Hayita Nohek, if this has been your minhag to sit like this, while you're in the sukkah and your table is in the house, Lo kiyamta mitzvat sukkah miyamecha, you have never done mitzvat sukkah in your lifetime, right? So that becomes a machloket over there, which once we discuss this, we'll come back to your question of what we paskin in regards to that scenario when the sukkah is in the house, in larger sukkah, whether or not we make a gezerah, that you should not be doing that or not. So says the Gemara. Mantana leha de tanu Rabbanan, bayit she'em bo arba amot al arba amot, patur mina mezuzah. Now we're going to get into an array of amazing Shas-wide questions of what is considered a house. In other words, in Daf Zayin, later on, we'll see what is the reasoning behind the Shita of Rebbe. Moments ago, we just threw in two braitas that mentioned Derech Agav, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi holds that the minimum size of sukkah is what? 4 amot by 4 amot. Not a tiny sukkah, but you need at least 6 feet by 6 feet. That's the minimum. What's the svar for that? What's the logic? Because it says, you have to live in the sukkah. So if you have to live in the sukkah, it has to be a living space. What is the definition of a living space? Right? That is the Gemara's answer in Daf Zayin, as we will get to it pretty soon, in the next few days, that we need a living space. And the Gemara says, well, if you need a living space, this should be a machloket for a lot of other sugyas as well. For instance, where do you have to put mezuzah on? Living space, right? What's the minimum area that's considered a living space? If I have a little balcony, for instance, there's a chayav sukkah, like a little sliver balcony that it's like, it's one of those like Los Angeles balconies that you're scared to even walk outside to them. It seems like they made it only for the looks of it. Okay, it's like 5 inches by 6 feet. That type of is that chayav b'sukkah? Do I have to put the mezuzah there? Do I have to put the ma'akeh there? What is considered a living space? It's a solid question. So says the Gemara, and we're going to get into this now. Bayit, if you have a place, she'em bo arba amot al arba amot, if you have a room and space that is smaller than, let's call it 36 feet square, right? It will be 6 by 6 feet, right? Arba amot by arba amot, patur mina mezuzah. That space is patur from mezuzah. Right now, don't be too quick to this. We're gonna don't think nothing is. We're gonna manage to complicate everything, right? So you have a 3-way machloket in Hilchot Sukkah. You have all these walk-in closets, right? Your washer and dryer space, your balconies, your storages, and so on and so forth. We'll get to all of that. But simply, the Gemara is saying it's patur. You have no need to put mezuzah on a room that is smaller than 6 feet by 6 feet, 4 amot by 4 amot. Umin hama'akeh. You're also patur from making a fence for a roof that is so small. It's not considered a space really. Ve'eno metameh b'negaim. It also doesn't become tameh with tumat negaim. In other words, if you find a tzarat in the walls of your house, it says, right? Bayit, the Torah says. So it has to be a bayit. If you have a small little dinky room, which is less than 4 amot by 4 amot, even if you have something that looks like a nega, it's no problem. It doesn't become tameh. It has to have a minimum of a living space for it to become tameh b'negaim. Ve'eno nechlat bebate arechoma. What does that mean? Ve'eno nechlat bebate arechoma means when you have portions of land in Eretz Yisrael that belong to a certain shevet, and they sold it, right? They sold it, and now they have time to redeem it until the Yovel. If you don't do it, sometimes it could become nechlat. If you didn't, does it go back? Does it not go back? So Rashi says, "Ela podeu leolam veyotze beyovel im lo ge'alo keshe'ar karka belo binyan." A regular field that you don't have a house on top of it, yovel, it comes out, comes back to your family portion again, right? There are certain rules and regulations for buildings that if you didn't redeem it and yovel passes and so on, sometimes it could become batei arei choma, it could become nechlat, it could become eternally out of your domain. But if you have a land with a small cubic of less than 4 amot by 4 amot built on it, that's not considered a batei arei choma, because it's not a bayit, it's smaller. So therefore, it will never become nechlat. It will never become eternally the buyers. It will always come back to the family's portion. And says the Gemara, "Ve'en chozrin alav me'orchei hamilchama." The Torah has a law that if you build a bayit chadash and you haven't started using it, you will not go to wage war. There are 3 examples, and then plus 1 of someone that's scared, someone that planted a vineyard, someone that built a new house, and someone that betrothed a wife and has not yet married completely would be patur from going to wage war. This is milchemet hareshut. We're not talking about milchemet mitzvah, right? And someone that's afraid. Those 4 examples. So what is considered a house? I built this structure that is less than 4 amot by 4 amot, says the Gemara, you don't go back. That's not a house. That's nothing. It's not considered bayit. Says the Gemara, ve'en me'arvim bo, ve'en mishtatfim bo, ve'en manichim bo eruv. And you cannot use it as a place for eruvei chaserot or shitufei mevoot. It cannot be used as a place in the chaser or as a place in the maboy for the food of eruv to be put in. What is that? It means whenever you have a courtyard that different families live in around the courtyard, in order to be able to carry in the courtyard from one house to another house, you need to do eruvei chatzerot, right? Eruvei chatzerot is eruv for the chatzer. How does that work? The different people around the courtyard, they are mishtatef, they share portions of food that they put out there, and they put it in one of their houses in the chatzer. So imagine if you have a room, like a small room, in the chatzer that's less than 4 amot by 4. Can I put the eruv there? No, you cannot. It has to be in one of the houses. It's not a house. There's a hole in the wall, literally, right? It's considered a hole in the wall. It's not considered a house. And same would be if you have a mabui, if you have a dead-end alley, a cul-de-sac. We spoke about this earlier on the first shiur. You need, right, shtufei mevoot. You need to do an eruv also there with the lechi and korah for people of different chatzerot, different courtyards that are open to this alley, and for them to be able to interchangeably use the area, the public area, the shared common area of the maboy, they have to do shtufei mevoot. What does that mean? You take food, again, shared pieces that the people give. Every chatzer has to share food, and then they put it in one of the chatzerot. So imagine if instead of a chatzer, you have a room that's less than 4 amot by 4 amot that's directly open to the maboy, directly open to this alleyway, right? We have, courtyard number 1, courtyard number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you have this little room that's also directly open to the maboy. Can you put the shitufei mevoot over there? Absolutely not. It has to be a minimum shiur of a living space opened to the maboy, excluding this little tiny hole in the wall, less than 6 feet by 6 feet. Ve'ein osin oto ipur ben shte ayarot. Now, what is that? Now, we're going to come back to this, some of these examples tomorrow, but when you have the halachot of Eruvin between two cities, you could have an extension of Eruv. Let me explain. If you have a city, and again, cities back in the day were not necessarily large, like Los Angeles City, I think is the greatest city in America, is the biggest city in America. But yeah, you could have 100 families and that was a city, right? They had walls around it, the living space was for a smaller amount of smaller communities. And on Shabbat, you have 2,000 amot around the city, which is included as the domain of that city. Now, where does the city end? So if I have, let's say, a square, nice and square town, which everyone's living space is very much in the same line with each other, that's easy, right? But what if I have a house that's sticking out, right? So we count that as the radius, and we draw a straight line from that. Imagine if you're squaring it in, and now the right side of this square is going to be that house, which is way out, sticking out of the town. So that, and then imagine I have then another house sticking out from that house, right? So that's also part of the town. But of course, we all could agree there has to be certain distance. If it's further than certain distance, it will be not considered in the same place when it's sticking out like that. So that extension has a shiur of 72 amot. We're going to discuss that B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow. But the place that you have also has to have a minimum size. You can't just make a cubic and say, oh, well, this is an extension, right? If you want it to be ibur ben shnei ayarot, if you want to connect two cities that are a few hundred feet away from each other, and you want to make it that on Shabbat everyone could go, come, the kids could play together, and so on and so forth, you make this ibur, you make this kiosks in the middle to show that the town is going between these two towns. They're connected. So first of all, they have to be pretty close to each other, right? They have to be just a few feet away. Every few feet, you have to make one of these kiosks, but the kiosk also has to be a minimum shiur of a house. What is that? 4 amot by 4 amot. If you have a room, a kiosk, a cubic smaller than 4 amot by 4 amot, it's not. You cannot use it as a ibur ben shte ayarot, which B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to discuss it. There's some other aspects over here that you need a minimum amount of 4 amot by 4 amot, which we're going to continue B'ezrat Hashem in the days to come.